Hey, how's it going? So I want to talk a little bit more about the shenanigans with the people LARPing at the Capitol. Specifically, I want to talk about the media's reaction to that and the public perception and how the media drives the public perception and how like President-elect Biden and all of this stuff is really driving public perception. And it's an interesting microcosm of how everything in the world is driven by the media and how the media is like literally brainwashing people. So my Facebook feed, and I'm sure yours too, has been full of people talking about if these were Black Lives Matter protests, things would be different. I believe President-elect Biden said something to that effect, that we all know that things would have gone very differently if these were Black Lives Matter protesters. He's not wrong, but he's wrong in the message that he's trying to say. Kamala Harris, who is like the most dishonest person in the history of the world. My God. But anyways, so she is out there saying, all summer long, we had peaceful protesters being tear gassed while these people were treated with kid gloves. Maybe that's not quite accurate. So we'll take a look at that. So I don't know if the people who write this stuff and who post on Facebook about this stuff, if they were just completely brainwashed and they believe this stuff, or if they're just incapable of critical thought because critical thought's not taught anymore and we as a society are no longer capable of critical thought. But let's just look at some things. Do you remember at the end of May of 2020, there were constant riots because George Floyd was killed. Now, real quick, we'll get to that in a minute, an interesting parallel there too. But George Floyd was killed, and, you know, it spurred all these riots. And during this process, there were like Targets burned down and there were other buildings burned down. But there was a police station in Minneapolis that was completely overrun. The protesters and the rioters went in, they forced the police out, then they burned the thing to the ground. Now, I'm fairly confident that the people at the Capitol used more force than the people at that police precinct that let the rioters burn it down. So just that one thing makes that argument completely, just absolutely bogus. I said this in my video yesterday, but you look at the events of the summer, and there were tons of buildings that were burned down, and some of them were federal buildings. There was the federal courthouse in Portland was attacked multiple times. And, well, the police stations, or I think there was a police station in Portland that was also burned down. And at no point that I'm aware of, now, I could be wrong, but I don't remember the police ever shooting any of these people and killing them. So that's pretty crazy. Now, along that same line, Kamala Harris was talking about tear gassing. Well, peaceful protesters were tear gassed. Okay, cool. People at the Capitol were tear gassed. There was tear gas deployed at the Capitol. Tear gas, CS gas, whatever it is commonly used to disperse large crowds. That's just what the police use. It's a non-lethal form of interjection to like break up crowds. So yes, that is used in the riots in DC. I don't know if you remember the images. There were images over the summer where you see like DC and there's like flames everywhere, and you see like the Washington Monument standing up. Well, those were the events that led to people being dispersed because they were violating curfew, and they were dispersed by using CS gas. Now, I know that some of these people were dispersed because they were in Lafayette Park, and President Trump wanted to walk across Lafayette Park to go to the church and hold up the Bible and all that stuff. And sure, you could think that's gross or whatever, but it's just a technique to disperse people. That's what it is. That's what it always is. That's what it was yesterday or the day before yesterday. That's what it is. It's nothing more. Stop making a freaking big deal out of it. If you're going to make a big deal out of it, that's cool. If you want to be consistent and say that the police should not use tear gas on anybody, but they used tear gas yesterday, and I'm pretty sure that these people were not opposed to that. What's the difference? And the other thing that I want to talk about is, what was her name? I forgot her name. Amber Barrett or something like that. I don't really know. I don't sorry, I don't care. The woman who was killed, like, I feel bad that she was killed, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over her, just like I didn't lose any sleep over George Floyd. So she was an unarmed person who was committing a crime, and she was killed. Now, I've been credibly informed that A, this only happens to black people, and B, that every time this happens, it's like this major outrage. Now, here's the thing with her versus, say, Jacob Blake. We'll use Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake wasn't even killed. Jacob Blake was armed at the time. The police were responding to a 911 call where Jacob Blake was trying to, I believe, kidnap or at least carjack his ex-girlfriend, who had filed sexual assault charges on Jacob Blake previously and had a restraining order against him. And he was taking the car with the kids, and the police knew all of this stuff when they showed up on scene. Then he had a knife. He was going into the car. He reached down into the floorboards of the car, and he still had the knife, and cops engaged him. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily the best thing in the world. I know a lot of people were talking about 7 shots. You've never obviously been in a situation where you need to discharge a firearm for your own safety. Like, it doesn't take a long time to discharge 7 shots. I believe there were 2 officers shooting. So we're talking 3 shots from one officer, 4 shots from the other officer maybe. You can shoot 4 bullets in a second, or maybe a second and a half. It happens real quick. You shoot until the threat is neutralized if you're actually in fear for your life. So I don't know. I know that the cops weren't charged, but I also know Jacob Blake was charged. Getting a little sidetracked here. None of that matters. The point is that if this woman who was breaking into the Capitol had been, well, I'm going to assume if she were black, if this were a Black Lives Matter protest who broke into the Capitol and one of the Black Lives Matter protesters were shot, there would be more rioting today. There'd be rioting all over the U.S. All major cities would be rioting. There would be giant building-sized murals. LeBron James or Dwayne Wade or well, I don't know, whoever, would put her name on their jerseys and would be speaking out against it. And instead, none of that's happening. It's so bizarre. Like, we care about unarmed civilians being shot until we don't care anymore, I guess. And here's the thing. Like, me personally, I am not losing any sleep over her getting shot. I think it's tragic when the police kill anybody, unless the police are actively defending their lives. And, you know, like, there's a lot of these stories have a lot of gray areas, like the Breonna Taylor thing or the Michael Brown thing. There's conflicting evidence, there's a narrative, and then the narrative might not be true, and I don't know. I wasn't there, I don't know, so I have to let it all play out. But I do know that the media is not consistent in the way that they cover these stories. Like, for some reason, you see in the news that this woman, well, she's a conspiracy theorist. It never mentions in the articles that she's unarmed. Like, every time there's an article about Breonna Taylor, it's unarmed black woman killed by police. This woman is conspiracy theorist killed by police. I don't know. What that does is, to the people who, like, you know, they read the headline. Most people, I think most of us are guilty of this. When you read a news story, like, a news story might be 20 paragraphs long. You read the headline and you maybe read the first 2 paragraphs, and then you are disinterested because most news stories start getting into the weeds where you just don't care. So you stop reading. And, you know, paragraph 5 or 6 might say she was unarmed, but to people reading this, they're not getting that information. And I find that to be very, very disingenuous. I find this to drive more division. Like, that's all this is doing, is sowing more division against people. If you believe that the cops are racist and you believe that the cops are out killing black people, and then you see this thing happening and they're telling you, look, these are white people and they weren't killed. Now this is just confirmation bias that the cops are racist, but they weren't racist then. And there's no nuance. There's no, okay, so there were police in riot gear or hell, they were dressed like soldiers at the Lincoln Memorial for a Black Lives Matter protest. And I find that to be disgusting. Like, I don't like militarized police. I don't. But let's look at the precedent here. Since 2014, I believe Michael Brown was killed in August of 2014. So since 2014, there have been riots associated with Black Lives Matter protests. Now, I'm not saying that the people protesting are all rioting. I'm not saying that. Most of the people protesting aren't rioting. However, when there's a Black Lives Matter protest, when the nighttime comes, there tends to be rioting. Buildings tend to get burned down. TVs tend to get stolen. Property damage is, everywhere. People are just running amok. There's a precedent for this. So if you know there's going to be a Black Lives Matter protest, it would make sense to ramp up the police presence to mitigate this. Now, this thing that happened in DC, as far as I know, there is no historical precedent for large groups of, I guess we'll call them right-wing militia members. That's not accurate, but we'll call them that. There's no precedent for these people like creating violence and burning things down and breaking into buildings and causing property damage. There's maybe you can make the argument that Charlottesville, but there's a lot of nuance involved in that too. There were two sides of people clashing, and like one crazy dude with schizophrenia went nuts and drove his car through a crowd and killed, I think her name was Elizabeth Hyder, whatever. And that sucks too. I mean, again, when a person who is not trying to harm somebody loses their life, like I find that to be a tragedy in all cases. And I think that there needs to be repercussions for that. But nonetheless, there's no historical precedent for this. This would be most akin to, I guess, the Tea Party. The Tea Party didn't destroy things. The Tea Party didn't cause property damage. There's also a lot of people who have theories that this was like a false flag and that a lot of these were Antifa and all that stuff. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But it would make sense that there would naturally be a larger police presence at events where there's a precedent for property damage, rather than at an event like this where there isn't. So either way, I think these are all pretty bogus narratives. I think that if you are capable of critical thought, you can look through all of these narratives and you can kind of see that the media is blowing smoke up your ass. But what it's doing is it's whipping people up. It's causing more of a frenzy. It's causing people to get mad at each other. It's causing division. And I don't know. I guess this stuff sells, but at what cost? Like, what's this doing to our society? This is really destructive stuff. And like, it's not, I don't know. So let's talk about race for a second. So I personally don't know that many people that I think are racist. I know a few people. I know a couple black people that I think are racist. I know a couple white people that I think are racist. I know a couple. And I don't like really associate with these people. I don't like them. Most people, I don't think give a shit. Like, I really, now this is coming from the perspective of a cis het white man, whatever. But I don't think most people care. Like, I don't go around thinking of myself as a white person. And maybe a lot of people make the argument that's because race doesn't matter to me. But I grew up in a town of all white people. Literally all of them. I mean, that's almost completely true. And I don't know how being white was a benefit in a town of all white people. I don't get it. I don't remember the few people who weren't white being treated differently because they weren't white. In my town, there were a few people of Indian, Pakistani, I don't know what to call it, Central Asian descent. There were a few people like that. There were a couple people who were East Asian, a couple. And there were a couple people who were Latino. And at the time, I remember there being one black person. And like, dude was in my homeroom in high school. I don't remember anybody giving a shit that he was black. Maybe they did, but I don't remember anybody caring about any of this stuff. No one made, publicly at least, that I saw, a scene about any of this. And I think that's how most people are. I think most people don't care. I could be wrong. I can only base it off of my perception, but I think that a lot of the narrative is stoked by the media, and it's driving people apart. And I think it's dangerous. So anyways, that's all I got. This video went a lot longer than I wanted it to. Again, if you like my videos, comment, like, subscribe. share my video. I'm not very good with marketing, and maybe I'll get better with that. I saw that I went from 20 to 25 subscribers overnight, so that's a 25% increase. That's pretty awesome, but I don't think that's going to continue. So anyway, have a good night.